Thank you very much, Mr. Jeffers, for those very kind words, and thank you for yielding time to me this evening to talk about this very important subject. Mr. Jeffers, your leadership on this issue, the issue involving strong labor unions and bringing American jobs back to American workers, is so critically important, and for that we appreciate your leadership. Mr. Speaker, the economic success of the United States is something that other nations every day try to emulate. The success of our country is not because of us here in Congress, the policymakers, but it's because of the hard work of so many Americans who helped build a strong and resilient nation. The role of African Americans has been particularly important over the years. The role of African Americans played in the early economic success of our country is one that is not well known to some people, but it was so vital to building the world power that we are today. Even before the Civil War, Black Americans were critical in helping to build ships and other seagoing vessels that were used to move agriculture goods and equipment to the growing nation by serving as caulkers, a job that was dominated by African Americans. Those same shipbuilders formed the Caulkers Association back in 1838 to protect African American caulkers by negotiating for higher wages and safer working conditions from their employers. The Caulkers Association counted Frederick Douglass, who worked as a caulker in Baltimore, as one of its members. After the end of the Civil War, 4 million former slaves were set free. African Americans who were freed found it very difficult to find work because of racial tension. They were often used by white employers as strike breakers so that their businesses could continue to operate while white employees were on strike. Well, as time went on, by 1902, at the turn of the century, more than 40 national unions didn't have any members, not a single one, who were African American. But as the quest for civil rights began in earnest, African Americans would soon find a home, a good home, with labor unions all across the country. By the 1930s, the Congress of Industrial Organizations welcomed everyone and counted both blacks and whites as members, and was among the most integrated organizations in the United States at that time. By 1945, more than 500,000 African Americans were members of unions that comprised the Congress of Industrial Organizations. Labor unions played a critical role, we've heard that tonight, in the civil rights movement, and served as one means by which African Americans could fight for civil rights and fair pay and safe working conditions. Mr. Speaker, we recently celebrated the 50th anniversary on the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. On August 28, 1963, more than 300,000 people, including myself, witnessed the call for civil and economic rights for African Americans, and on that hot day in August, we heard Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. deliver his historic I Have a Dream speech. The march was one of the largest rallies for civil rights in the history of our country, and it was organized in large part, I want to make this point, it was organized in large part by labor unions, including the Amalgamated Clothing Workers and the United Auto Workers. The large role that labor unions played in organizing the March on Washington cemented their place in history in providing for racial and economic equality. In 2012, more than 14 million people were members of a labor union. But you know what? That is down from almost 18 million 30 years ago. That is very sad. Why is that? The U.S. economy and federal and state laws have changed since the heyday of the industrial manufacturing, where unions could organize with relative ease. Jobs that once required a human being are now being performed by a machine. Good-paying American jobs have been relocated overseas, where labor is cheap and working conditions are not as heavily regulated. And perhaps most damaging have been the onslaught of disgraceful anti-union policies that we have seen on television, sadly seen on television, that have been signed into law in states all across the country. For African Americans, labor unions continue to be vitally important because they are committed to maintaining the hard-fought gains of opportunity and equality. Since their inception, labor unions have helped African Americans fight for equal rights and equal pay and safe working conditions. Now, African Americans are more likely than any other group to be a union member and earn more than 30% more than their non-union counterparts. Labor unions will continue to be a vital part of our economy, and we must do all that we can to ensure that the labor movement thrives with the same intensity as it did 60 years ago. I urge my friends in labor to continue their work. It is appreciated. I recently visited the A. Philip Randolph Institute. Ms. Cleola Brown is the president. I went to their dinner just a few days ago here in Washington, and I want to commend them publicly for the work that they are doing. I thank them for invoking the name of A. Philip Randolph, who, as Mr. Jeffries said earlier, founded the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. Let me also recognize the important work of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, who was headed by my good friend Bill Lucy, who was Secretary-Treasurer of ASME for many years, and now the Reverend Terry Melvin is now carrying on the work of Bill Lucy. And so I thank my friends in labor and urge them to continue the great work that they are doing in this country. And Mr. Jeffries, I thank you for yielding time. I thank you for your leadership. And at this time, I will yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the distinguished